Let's continue with the Surangama Sutra today. And before the actual class, I would like to make just a short and brief note up on the specific day of today, which is the Teacher's Day. In fact, it is the Teacher's Day over here, but the UNESCO back in the 90s, they made October the 5th as the International Teacher's Day. However, over here, usually we have the Teacher's Day on September the 10th. Whatever date it is, it would be a correct date to celebrate anyhow. And I really want to express my gratitude towards all of the teachers and pay my veneration. And I think we all should do that. In fact, not only to the teachers to the people who are working as teachers, as well as people who have ever taught us anything about the worldly knowledge, as well as morality, and any of shared their experience and so on. We, in fact, all owe them our gratitude, because without their sharing of experience and knowledge, we would be rather still quite ignorant and confused. Therefore, we should have this great respect and veneration towards all the teachers and people who've taught you things before. I myself, in fact, when I calculated in the morning, in fact, I've taught for 35 years. Of course, 35 years, it sounds rather quite a long time for an ordinary teacher. But compare Pontsog Rinpoche. In fact, Pontsog Rinpoche started teaching from when he was 13, and between he was 13 years old until he passed away at 74, and he taught for over 50 or 60 years. So the scholars, professors, teachers nowadays, in fact, compared to the years that Pontsog Rinpoche taught others, is probably not as long. On the other hand, I really want to encourage those who are teachers to continuously to cultivate the talents. In fact, you should not only cultivate the talents in terms of their skills. I think more than skills, you should then teach the people, teach your student to be human, to be the human with kindness, with wisdom, with compassion. In fact, I understand that nowadays the career title of teacher is mainly referring to the ones who give teachings on skills. But the teachers, in fact, burdens much more heavy responsibilities on their shoulders, because the teachers have to teach the students how to live their life, how to develop their values, how to then understand and develop their morality and many aspects other than skills and craftsmanship. So for the teachers, you are lamps for many people. You are the refuge place and good spiritual friends of all sentient beings as well. According to the Lankavatara Sutra, where it is stated that the teachers are considered as lamps, as the bestower of knowledge, and so on. There are many different analogies. because you're truly leading the people to kindness, to a better future. Therefore, you can be considered as the engineer of human spirits. So, I really hope that you could cultivate the talents that not only have skills and craftsmanship, but also morality and kindness and compassion and all those kind of spiritual qualities as well. So not only to the worldly teachers, I'd like to extend such kind of wish to all of our Dharma masters as well. So in this special day, I would like to make this a special note before the actual class, so that my hope for you is, so that you know that my hope for you is to continuously to work as a teacher, or in this position to continuously to guide others. In fact, during the teaching, when it comes to the actual Surangama Sutra, I wanted to tell and share lots of the stories. Lots of the stories you are hearing now, it's not some made-up stories. These kind of stories are the stories that is widely quoted and used by the great masters from the past, and they're not based on in fact, the stories are based on evidence. They're not just frivolous stories that's made up by others. Recently, when I listen to the after-class oral presentation, which repeats to our classes, I noticed that the majority of people didn't really listen to the stories properly. For example, the history that I've told about how lots of the pilgrimage sites of Buddhism were buried underneath, and how the history of the Buddhism and how the history of the archaeologists rediscovered those pilgrimage sites and so on. I think they didn't really pay attention to the story. I noticed that the majority of Buddhists, they really only care about the practice aspect of Buddhism, or the Buddhism aspect solely. But when it comes to the different kinds of religions, the different kind of schools, when it comes to the arts and history and all of these kind of scholastic aspect of the teaching, they're not interested anymore. They feel that they are about to attain rainbow body and attain the supreme realization. Therefore, what's the point of studying and understanding the history aspect of Buddhism? What does it have to do with me? I think some of the people would consider that's some people would consider that's where they are at this point in terms of their realization. They feel that they're about to gain enlightenment within 6 or 12 months. So what's the point of understanding technology, of science, of development of civilization and so on? What's the point of all that? I think lots of people really feel that way. But in fact, to attain rainbow body, to attain the supreme enlightenment is not that easy. And practice cannot, and you cannot just envision yourself attaining such kind of enlightenment with a short period of practice. So I really looked into lots of the resources to help you to then build up your knowledge base, so that later on you can use such knowledge to help others. Because in fact, if it is not helpful to you, I wouldn't spend so much time of looking for these kind of stories. it really takes me a lot of time to research and look for lots of the stories or even some of the facts and histories. For example, yesterday I told you the story of Alexander Cunningham's story, the archaeologist's story. I spent lots of time when I was in India back in the 90s, when I was doing the research years before and last winter. In fact, during the 3 phases, I spent lots of time to look for the history of rediscovering the archaeological sites. You can take it as only a story. However, such kind of key factor is truly important to Buddhism history. Therefore, as practitioners, you really should listen to the stories that I tell very carefully, because I am trying to make a point. And in fact, behind each of the stories and each of the classes, I spend tremendous amount of time to prepare for the classes. If you're listening to one class, if your mind is rather disturbed and distracted halfway through the class, and then you probably miss one key point and completely forgot about how the different stories connect to each other. For example, when I'm telling the story of a history, you should contemplate upon why I am telling such a story, because I am trying to make a point. And why don't you try to listen and contemplate why I'm trying to make such a point? I am not nagging you, and my words are not really repetitive for no reason. From time to time, I try to repeat for different reasons. On top of that, I think lots of people do not understand how to listen to the Dharma. In the text, the words of my perfect teacher, at the very beginning, it talks about the proper ways of listening to the Dharma. I think for those of you who don't know how to listen to the Dharma, you should then go back and read it. The merit that we receive from listening to the class is tremendous. Don't even mention about the merit that we accumulate through listening and contemplating and practice the Dharma together. Let's just think about chanting the king of aspiration of Samatha Vajra at the end. Just contemplate upon how many people are doing this practice together with you at the same time. Such kind of merit is immeasurable. Chinese, Tibetan language, as well as other kinds of languages are all available. Therefore, the chanting of the before class recitation as well as the after class chanting, you should try your best to participate in them, because all the languages are available. And it doesn't take that much time, really. It takes about half an hour in the beginning and maybe around 15 minutes at the end. It doesn't really take that much time when you consider how much time you spend in distraction. If you can focus your mind and begin the class with a kind aspiration and maintain such kind of aspiration and intention all along throughout the whole class, and then at the end dedicate the merit, then such kind of merit is inexhaustible. Last class, we talked about how Buddhism got lost in the history of India. The river of history is quite turbulent, and such kind of events that happens to the Dharma and to the history of Dharma. Therefore, we should contemplate upon such kind of changes and impermanence. Also, let's just take a quick review of last class. Last class, we talked about the 6 kinds of accomplishment. The accomplishment of faith, of listening, of time, of the master, of the place, of the assembly. So those are the 6 accomplishments. Last time we also talked about the Jetavana Vihara. In fact, we talked about it many times throughout their teachings. So we are at a place where we're going to talk about the sixth accomplishment of the assembly. Over here, there are 1,250 bhikshus. There are the Shravakas and the Shravakas who've already uphold the perfect precepts. Those are the great bhikshus that all gathered over there. In fact, when we look at the number 1,250, that sounds very familiar, isn't it? In fact, this is the numbers of students that followed the Buddha very constantly and most of the time. For example, this number appeared in the Vajrachatika or the Diamond Sutra, as well as the Amitabha Sutra. According to the record, historical record of Vasubandhu also had around over 1,000 of disciples following him at that time. And Ponsog Rinpoche, at the end of his life, he had around 5,000 disciples following him. Anyhow, over here it says that 1,250 bhikshus. And who are these bhikshus? Who are these disciples then? According to some of the history records, it is stated that there are the three great Kasyapas. Kashyapa, in fact, was born in a Brahmin family, was from a Heretics tradition. And then the three Kashyapa brothers has about 1,000 disciples following him, and then Madhgalyayana as well as Shariputra, they both had about 100 disciples each, and therefore that's 100, and that's 1,200. And the Upanishad, who had about 50 and 50 disciples following them. So the 1,000 who followed the three Kashyapas and 200 following Shariputra as well as Madhgalyayana and the 50 disciples of Upanishad and the 5 original disciples who follow the Buddha. Therefore, in total, there are 1,255 people following them. But over here, it states in the 1,250 bhikshus as well as the 5. In fact, it should be 1,255. So, do you know about the story of the three Kashyapa brothers? In fact, when the Buddha first renounced from his palace life, and then King Bimbisara told the king, told Shakyamuni at that time, who was not enlightened, said that once you get enlightened, then I will fulfill all your wishes. If you gain the realization of Anattara Samya Sambodhi, I genuinely invite you to come to my country and benefit my people over here in my kingdom. And after Shakyamuni Buddha attained enlightenment, then King Bimbisara came to him and invited him to his country. At that time, the Kashyapa family has 3 sons. The three sons,
他的这个眷属呢是
out
比
of
较
which
多
the
的，而且他是
eldest
频婆娑罗
son
王的过世，就是那个
was
时候佛教还
the
没有，
teacher
就是
of
然后
the king
他是这个频
Bimbisara,
婆娑罗王的
although
故
he
事。
was
然后
from
佛陀
a
成就以后
heritage
到了这个
past.
国家的时候呢，跟这个
So
大驾
after
舍呢就是
the
一起
king
做一些
invited
对
the
话，
Shakyamuni
对话的过
Buddha
程当中，那个
to
大驾舍呢就是对
his
佛陀非常
kingdom,
有信心，很想就是把他当
Kashyapa
做自
then
己的
listened
老
to the
师上身。
discussion
他
and
后
the
来
dialogues
他就
given
考
by
虑
the
到就是
Buddha
可能
and
这样不太好，
Mahayana
就是对佛陀
Buddhism.
就是说是你赶快离开吧，就是如果你
And at
这
that
样
time,
带
he
下
had
去的
this
话呢，就是
aspiration
频婆
of
娑罗王的过世，
um,
然后我就医治你的话呢，他心里想的
relying
是
on
说
the
的
Buddha
那
as
个
his
反正
teacher.
他的
However,
意
he
思
felt
是
that
就是你赶快离开，不然的话
it
如果
can't-
就是
it
我要
can't,
医治你的话呢，就是他心里很想医治
he
佛
can't
陀
do that
但是如果我要
because
医治你的话
he
呢，
felt
那
that
我的这个
if
眷属
he
都
were
就
to
不
rely
好
upon
了，
the
就是然
Buddha,
后我以后就
then
是
all
就
of
受到
his
供养，
disciples
就是
would
所
all
以
run away
让
from
这个
him and
佛
not
陀呢
rely
就要
on
求
him
这个
anymore.
赶快离开。
Therefore, he
那么这个时候佛
instead
陀说
of
我
relying
可不可以
upon
在
the
这里
Buddha
住
as
一
his
晚上，
teacher,
我
he
可以离
asked
开，
the
但
Buddha
是
to
你如果不
leave
是
the
大
country.
乘行的话，我可
And
以
then
这
the
个
Buddha
住一天
said,
可不可以？
okay,
然后
so
那个
I can leave
就
if
是
you
家
don't
舍
have
呢，就是
great,
说是
if
那
you
就
don't have
就一天
great
可能
anger
不行了，我
towards
们这边
me,
有一个杜
then
龙，
can I
这个
just
杜龙的
ask
话呢，
you
就是你
to
可能
let me
很多
stay
人
with
一
you
天
for
都不
one
让来。
night?
后来那个
And
他说杜龙的
Kashyapa
话呢，
at
就
that
并
time
不是
said,
很害怕，
I
就
in
是佛
fact
陀说
have
是
no
我把这个
aggression
三毒都
towards
已
you.
经这个
However,
降服了，就是这
there's
并不是
a
很可怕的。
poisonous
然后佛陀
naga
当时就
who
显现十八
stays
圣
over
果
here.
就是
That
把
naga
这个恶
might
龙
be
就是
really
降服
angry at you
恶
though.
龙降服的时候
But
呢，
the
就
Buddha
是那
said,
个
that's okay, because
这
I
个
have already
就
eradicated
是
all
恶
the
龙
three
恶龙降
poisons
服的
within
时候
me.
呢，就
Therefore,
刚才那
I
个假
would
设
not
这
be
个
afraid of
和
the
他的这个
poisonous
眷属
naga
来看
anymore.
到那个佛陀的这些
And at
身段，
night,
听到
the
佛陀
naga
的
appeared,
这
and
些
the
这个
Buddha
现象，就
subjugated
这
the
个时候
naga
呢，
with the
就是他
with
们
the
这个身
18
体极
kinds
大的
of
信心，后来呢，就是
miraculous
获得了这个
manifestation.
阿罗汉果位，
Then,
就500个人就是当天晚上
when he was
这个不但
when
降
the
服了，
Buddha
还
was
是获得这
manifesting
个正
with
果。
his 18
然后
kinds
呢，
of
他的
miraculous
这个总
actions,
体两个的话
upon
呢，就是
seeing
500个
such
眷
kind
属
of
那么
miraculous
这
actions,
500个眷属的话呢，就是因为有
Kashyapa
这
as
个
well
佛陀
as
后来
his
他们也是
brothers
得过，
and
所以
the
短短的
500
这个时间当中
disciples
的话呢，就是这
all
1000个人呢，
then
就是全部都不但是这个就是降
attained
服
a certain
还有呢，就是
realization
已经
and
这个得过。所以说
took
这是
refuge in the
这
Buddha.
个假
And
设的
then
这些
after
弟子
that,
呢，就是当时
500
是这
more
样
disciples who witnessed
得
this
来的
and
就是
took
佛陀
refuge
得来
with
的
the,
也好，才
to
是
the
这样
Buddha and
然后那
attaining
个
a certain level of realizations as well.
这个
So that's
什
the
么
story behind
这
the
个
three
目犍连
Kashyapa
和舍利子
brothers
的这个弟子呢，
of
当
taking
时是
refuge
那
in the
个舍
Buddha.
利子啊，就是舍利子的话呢，
And then
就是也
there's
是
also
外
a
道
story
的非
of
常著名的，而
Shariputra.
且他们两个呢关系
Shariputra
是
is
特别好
quite
的，
well
就互
known
相都说他们两个都是外道的啊，就是都外道的。然后他们两个都互相有一种约定，就是谁就是得到一些这个正果啊，就是得过的话呢，那互相都告诉他们啊，还是关系很好的。
would
后来有一
share
次，这
all
个舍利
kinds
子
of
呢，就是到
spiritual
外面去的时候呢，
experiences
就
and talk
是
about
看到
this
了
kind
那
of
个马
spiritual
上地
paths
球啊，
with
就是
one
然后
another, with
就
each
看到
other.
他的这种庄严的这种现象的话呢，就是让他不得不产
When
生极大的这个信
Shariputra
心。
saw
然后呢，
Asaji, who
就
was
他就
a
问
bhikshu
问那个
following
马
the
上地
Buddha
球，
at that
说是
time,
你这
and
么庄严的这
Shariputra,
个信
upon
你的老
seeing
师是谁？
this
你所修的法是什么？
really
然后这个马上比丘
inspiring
呢，就是
deportment of
就
Asaji
是说
and
我
asked
的这
him,
个老师呢，就是
who
叫
is your
释迦
teacher?
牟尼佛。
And
我所修
Asaji,
的法呢，
Bhikshu
就是
Asaji said that
什
my
么这
teacher
个若
is
法因
Buddha
缘生，法以因
Shakyamuni.
缘灭。
And
什么是生灭因缘？
the
佛
teachings
大
that
三
my
所
teacher
指
gave me
就
was that
他说
all
我
dharmas
呢就是
arising
修的
from
法呢，
causes
就
and
是这
conditions
些。
will be
那
brought
么
to
这个时候呢，
cessation
他
due
就
to
产
certain
生了极大
causes
的信
and
心。然
conditions.
后
All
这个
dharmas
舍利
arise
子和
and
他的
cease
这
due
个
to causes
眷
and
属呢，
conditions.
就
This
开
is
始
the
这
teaching
个
of the
修持这
Tathagata,
个法，
the
就是修持
great
这个法。然后呢，这
Shramana.
个他想不
So
告诉这个目犍连的话，那就是不好。
at that time, upon hearing the teaching, upon hearing these 4 stanzas, Shariputra had a great devotion and a great faith. And Shariputra felt that he had to share this with his best friend, Mahamodgalayana. And then after talking to Mahamodgalayana, they both went to the Buddha and took refuge to the Buddha along with the 200 disciples that they had at that time. And after receiving the teachings from the Buddha, they all attained arhathood. According to the Vinaya Sutra, where the translation is a bit different than the previous one that is stated in the sutra taught by the Buddha in the beginning. It is translated as all Buddhas originated from a cause. The Tathagata has taught this cause, that which brings the cause to cessation. This too has been taught by the great Shramana. I think we in fact quote this very often, very frequently. In Buddhism, we often recite and quote from some of the from the sutras, and the mantra of causality, in fact, is the Sanskrit version of this 4-verse stanza. Whenever we do any kind of consecration ceremonies, we would recite this in the Sanskrit mantra and remind one another of the beginning of the causes. The teachings of the Buddha is rather different. And what's so different about the Buddha's teaching? In fact, the difference is that it talks about the origination, it talks about the causality. In fact, everything happens. All the dharmas originate from the cause. And that is from the aspect of relative truth, and from the ultimate truth, we talk about all causality is empty. So out of all the teachers, all the great teachers in this world, the great Shramana, that is the Buddha Shakyamuni, is the greatest teacher of all. So I've briefly explained to you of the stories of the assembly. So there were 1,250. On top of that, there are the 5 original disciples of the Buddha as well. So these group of people are often following, they used to, were often following the Buddha at that time. And from such kind of descriptions, you will be able to know that at that time, those were the group of people who followed the Buddha often. To continue, let's then study the following part. This is more like the scene setting aspect. Then, with all the arhats and bodhisattvas present, what are their merits then? Compared to the other sutras, the Surangama Sutra is translated really well. In Chinese translation, the majority of the stanzas are translated in 4 characters of Chinese, 4 Chinese characters. And for people who don't really have a good foundation in the Chinese language, especially in the ancient Chinese language, they tend to have a hard time to understand this. But the translation in Tibetan language is rather much more easier to understand. Okay, so over here it says that the great arhats who had crossed the stream of transmigration, they had already surpassed the defilements. They eradicated all the defilements. Such kind of great arhats. According to the
所以一般来讲，大阿罗汉的话，那就是实际上这个大菩萨。
According to the sutras where it is says that the great arhats sometimes it is they can be considered as the great saints, and sometimes the Buddha is also called the great arhats because what a great arhat means is that the one who had completely destroyed all the defilements and afflictions.
还有什么样呢？是这个佛字啊，就是住持三朝住有。
Next one it says that they uphold his teaching firmly. Could leap over all realms of existence and had achieved respect and had achieved the respect, inspiring deportment which was held in great esteem throughout the country. In the Chinese translation, it says that the son of the Buddha. So in the what does it mean by the son of the Buddha? It means that as the son, as the heir of the Buddha, then they upheld the teachings of the Buddha and try to continuously to pass down the teaching of the Buddha. And then they can be called the heir of the Buddha. The bodhisattvas can be called the heir of the bodhisattva because the bodhisattvas are the Buddha's mind heir in terms of body, mind, speech. And the arhats can be considered as the speech heir because they as they hear the teachings of the Buddha and attend arhathood. So what do they uphold then? In fact, they uphold the teachings. They constantly abide and stay in the state of the Dharma and uphold the correct Dharma. So the heir of the Buddha upheld his teaching firmly. So all the bodhisattvas and the heir of the Buddha, they are going to uphold the Tathagata's teaching, and on top of that, they would continuously to pass down the teachings and propagate the teachings. In China mainland, usually the abbots of each temples are called the upholders of the Dharma or upholders. Why are they called upholders? In fact, in the Chinese language, it has two aspects. One is uphold, and the other one is to abide in. On top of that, they will then continuously to propagate, to give teachings of the Dharma. According to the precious teaching of the Chan monastery, it says that as an upholder, there are three things, or as an abbot, there are three things that you should not do. There are the three don'ts for an abbot. Don't be discouraged when things are rather quite chaotic, because if you are afraid of all the chores and of all the little things that could bother you, then you shouldn't be an abbot, you shouldn't be an upholder of the Dharma, because there will obviously be people coming to you with their problems. And the other one is, the second don't is that when things are complicated, do not make a fuss about nothing. Do not make a fuss about anything. In fact, there are people nowadays, they make a fuss about nothing all the time, and such kind of people cannot be and should not be an abbot or upholder. some of the Dharma teachers, they tend to be very ups and downs and have lots of such kind of emotional ups and downs. Usually, when I hear people give really good oral presentation, I would go back and have a good sleep. But when people do not do a good oral presentation after the class, I would feel that why couldn't they give a good oral presentation? And I would not be able to have a good sleep. Sometimes when I hear people do not understand what I've told, I feel rather quite upset about it. For example, yesterday I only heard one of the lay practitioners who actually told the stories quite well. And then the third one is don't argue when in trouble. And if you can do these, if you can then avoid all these three above, then an abbot would be able to never be affected by external factors. When we think about taking up the responsibilities of taking up the responsibilities of propagating and abiding in the Tathagata's prayer, I think we should keep in mind that we should not avoid little things, and we should not make a fuss of nothing. We should try to understand where the balance is. In terms of managing the centers, managing any kind of Dharma practicing Sangha, we should really understand how to be appropriate in handling everything. There are people who would expel the students and disciples rather quite frivolously and out of not much of a serious reason. However, you should also not to take the other extreme that let other people do whatever they want. The word abbot, it has the meaning of upholder of the Dharma, the one who is abiding the Dharma. I think the ones who are managing a Sangha, managing a center, they can also be called an abbot because that's what they're doing. They're propagating the Dharma. They are then abiding the Dharma as well as upholding the Dharma. People have very different capacities and very different wisdom. The ones with wisdom, they can fulfill and they can then handle all kinds of situations very appropriately. And the ones without wisdom, they will make a chaos out of nothing. And they would feel rather quite upset afterwards. So people's capacities are quite different. In terms of propagating the Dharma, when it comes to managing the team, managing the Sangha, managing the center, I really hope that you could contemplate, you can then study the management skills. Do not think of yourself as someone who is so great and you don't have to learn from anyone else at all. I think you should try to be rather humble and learn from everyone. If you were to be very humble and learn from everyone's experience, then in such a way, you will be able to manage the team, you'll be able to be more mature in terms of your own management skills. According to Mi Rinpoche, he said that lots of the things that we've done when we were young, in fact, are quite naive and laughable even once we get mature. So, in order to avoid feeling ashamed of ourselves afterwards, why don't we take the opportunity and to be humble and learn from everyone to gain experiences? So, that's the term of abbot or upholder. The next one, then it says that you could leap over all realms of existence. Some of the commentaries it says that to leap over all realms of existence talks about arhathood, and some said that this part in fact talks about bodhisattvas. In terms of existence, there are the 12 existences out of the as the categories of the 3 existences. In terms of the realm of form and the realm of formlessness, realm of desire. The arhats and bodhisattvas, they are completely leapt over all realms of existence, because without attaining such kind of state, they won't be able to attain arhathood or becoming a bodhisattva of bhumis. The next one is as which was held in great esteem throughout the country. In order to benefit sentient beings, they would achieve all kinds of respect-inspiring deportments to influence others. For example, they would uphold the deportment of being peaceful, being humble, being respectful, and being very inspiring to others in order to eradicate other people's afflictions. Just as it is said in the Vimalakirti Sutra, where it says that without getting out of the samadhi or meditative absorption, one would manifest in different deportments, such as walking, lying down, and sitting, and so on. The other explanation is that such kind of deportments, including the body, mind, speech deportments, in order to benefit others. So this is about the deportment aspect. Then the next part is the wisdom aspect. They followed the Buddha to turn the wheel of the Dharma and were qualified to hand down his Dharma. So, arhats or bodhisattvas, they would follow the Tathagata and then turn the Dharma wheel. And they were qualified to hand down his Dharma. Because the means of turning the wheel of Dharma is to spread the wisdom to all generations, so that the wisdom could be passed down from generations to generations. In Tibetan language, the addition, in fact, it is translated as that to propagate the wisdom, because when we are propagating the wisdom, it could eradicate our inappropriate actions. According to the treatise on the provisions for enlightenment by Nagarjuna, it says that emulating the Buddha to turn the supreme Dharma wheel will eradicate all evil thorns, which is the treasury of merit of a bodhisattva. What it means is that after you turn the wheel of Dharma, in fact, it will eradicate all the evil thorns. They will eradicate all the non-correct Dharma. What is evil thorns? It's that something that is something inappropriate in terms of actions, but it's under the cover of being an appropriate behavior or conduct. So, to eradicate all the evil thorns is the treasury of merit of bodhisattva. To us, in fact, we should spend the time to study and read more into the commentaries of the previous masters. Also, I would like to make this avocation that when we're studying the Surangama Sutra, I really encourage you to read more into the commentaries of the previous masters. Nowadays, it's rather quite easy to gain access to different resources. You can then look up on it online. There are open source material, and you can print it out. You can then go to bookstores and get books online and so on. In fact, lots of the resources, lots of the commentaries are available. Of course, there are the ones which are lost throughout the history. For example, do you remember the story that we told that Master Wei-Chue, who composed this commentary of the 3 volumes of Surangama Sutra because of the blessings of Manjushri, that Manjushri came into his mouth and dissolved into him and then started composing the commentary. And then after he finished composing the commentary, then Manjushri left in his dream. But when I went back last night, I really wanted to read this commentary, so I spent a lot of time looking up for it. But in fact, that commentary had lost in the history. It is no longer to be found. It is such a shame and such a pity for our generation that we will no longer be able to read it. Also, Master Xu Yun's commentary, which was one of the most important work of his life, was also lost because of the turbulent time he lived in. So, when we look into this kind of commentaries no longer being available, it is really such a pity. Back in the Tang Dynasty, Master Wei-Chue, in fact, wrote this commentary. Do you know how many commentaries there are in total in history? There are about over 127 volumes of commentaries based on all the previous great masters. And there was a scholar who listed this 127 commentaries in a chronological format, where he listed Master Wei-Chue as the first one because he composed that one back in Tang Dynasty, and then second one is Yishuan, and so on. For us, the following disciples, in fact, I think that we should read more into the commentary. I took a short video of all the commentaries that I have on my bookshelf on my table, and I'll give you a glimpse of that.
Mm-hmm. 如果有时间，最好多看一下南严经的各种不同的讲记。我想在这里好多楞严经的书啊，本来想好好的看一下，但是时间还是有限的。这个是寒山大师的，还有欧益大师的，宣化上人的，然后元益大师的，还有什么南怀瑾的，就有好多那个大德们的这些注释。如果有时间多看一下好不好？不要只读一个楞严经，多看一下其他的本本，好不好 ？OK， 拜拜。
It was a selfie. I think nowadays people really like this kind of short clips, isn't it? Okay, so to continue, when we talk about to pass down the wisdom, I really hope that you could spend the time and effort to study, because lots of the times I think it's quite difficult for us to understand the Surangama Sutra based on our soul, based on our abilities and capacities solely. Therefore, we need the commentaries from the previous masters. Even if you can't and don't have time to read into the commentaries of others, at least you should read into the transcripts of each classes. So I really wanted to make such a note based on that. Anyhow, we've talked about we've already talked about the Vinaya aspect, which is the discipline aspect, and then the wisdom aspect, and this part we're going to talk the previous we talked about departments, and now we're going to talk about the self-discipline. Previously we talked about departments, the wisdom as well. Over here, the third aspect is self-discipline. Being self-disciplined, they set a good example in the three worlds in which they appeared in countless transformation bodies to deliver living beings to save future generations from defilements. According to the praise to the actions of the Buddha, where it said that in the wilderness of birth and death, the Vinaya is the perfect guiding master. So, good example. They follow the Buddha to turn the being self-disciplined. They set a good example. Good example is in fact quite important, which remind me a story of spread by setting good example. I will retell this story again. Spread by setting a good example. It means that to propagate the good Dharma, to become a good teacher to the three worlds. And this is commonly used in the Han Buddhism. But there was a person who was then winning bread in the, instead of spreading by good example, it is winning bread by setting a good example. Especially in the time that employment is such a difficult time, and cooking, you have to cook for yourself. But of course, in this time, I think to have bread on your table is not that difficult anymore. In fact, on the Tibetan plateau is no longer like it was before. It is not that people would starve to death anymore, unlike there are people who would go out to then ask for charity, saying that we have no money to eat. It's not like that at all. Compared to Cambodia and compared to compared to lots of the African countries, I think Tibetan plateau is quite plenty in terms of food, at least. There was a story recorded in the memoir of Dream City that is written by Master Dan Xu. And it recorded the story of inside this temple called the Jinshan Temple, where there was a monk whose job was to lit lamps. Back in that time, on June the 6th, it is said that those are the days to sun-dry those books and sun-dry lots of the precious objects, artifacts that is usually stored in the temples, so that they're not molten and so on. And then, because this monk who is in charge of lighting lamps and candles is rather quite dull in capacity. Therefore, and he's quite gullible. And the other monks was making fun of him and told him, saying that, well, on this day, you should also lay out all your candles so that your candles won't get molten either. Therefore, he took out all of his candles and spread it over the yard. And he put all of those candles underneath the sun for the entire day. And in the evening, when it cooled down, all the candles, all the wax were all melted, and only the wicks were all standing up, and all of the wax were flooding all over the floor. And in the evening, when they were about to lit candles, the other monks, the monk who was in charge of the abbot of the monastery said that the abbot of the monastery, in fact, was quite disappointed and surprised and disappointed in him, and then found an excuse to expel him, saying that, well, you are such a smart monk. You shouldn't stay in our small temple because you are over-talented, you are overqualified to be a monk who's only in charge of lighting the candles. And in fact, it was not the abbot who said so, it was the chanter. So, upon hearing the chanter said that, this monk who was lighting the candles thought, this chanter is so good to me, and whenever I would go out, I would always remember him. And the chanter told him, saying that, why don't you go out and study in a different monastery where you can become a great master later on, to then set good examples and liberate the three worlds? And at that time, this monk who was lighting the candles thought it was such a great idea, and instead of thinking setting a good example, he thought, instead of hearing that set a good example and spread the Dharma by setting good example, he heard that winning bread by setting good example in the three worlds, and he thought, wow, how wonderful is that? I'll be able to win bread wherever I am in the three worlds. So that's how this monk got expelled and sent away to a different monastery. So this monk then went to Master Dixian and studied and told him that I am in fact of great talent, told by the chanter from my previous temple, and he said that I will be able to win bread anywhere in the three worlds and spread the good teaching of the Dharma to benefit them. Master Dixian, after hearing this, understood immediately of his capacity, and he didn't expel him. Instead, the master asked him to work in the kitchen. He's in fact quite diligent. He's very hardworking. He cooked, he washed dishes, he cleaned the temple, and all of these. Upon witnessing his diligence, Master Dixian then asked this monk to recite the stanzas of the Lotus Sutra as well as the Surangama Sutra. At the beginning, it took him a long time to remember even one stanza, but slowly and slowly, with his perseverance as well as his diligence, he then got much better in the later years. And later on, Master Dixian asked him to memorize Master Oyi's commentary on the Surangama Sutra. This is how thick this is. Master Oyi's commentary is very difficult to read in terms of the wording and so on, but the content is quite profound. So this monk was asked to memorize the entire commentary that is as thick, that is this book. So he memorized this commentary as well as a commentary on the Lotus Sutra of Master O.E. And he could memorize everything at that time. He was really excellent. And then later on, he became an associate professor, almost an associate master. So whenever the master is not there, he would be the one who gives the teaching. He's no longer dull in capacity anymore. He's almost like the. He's almost like the. After recitation of the teaching of the Surangama Sutra and the Lotus Sutra, it almost seems that he had opened his being able to recite and teach and become much more eloquent, just as he had completely opened his samadhi of eloquence. In fact, he at that time not only gave teachings whenever it is his turn to teach, he also continued with his previous work in the temple, such as cooking and washing in the kitchen and so on. He would wear an apron whenever he was in the kitchen, and people would ask him and signaling him that this is his turn to give teaching of the Dharma. He would then take off his apron and put on his robe and went onto the throne and give teaching. That's how he was later on in his age. The chanter, do you still remember the chanter? In fact, at that time, the chanter told him at the time of expelling him, saying that whenever you become a good master, then I'll become your chanter for you. I'll then lead the chanting of the whole assembly to welcome you to give the teaching. And later on, when this monk became really good at giving teachings, the chanter got great faith in him and agreed, and then came to study with him and really became his chanter. So he is renowned as the monk who sun-dried the candle. In fact, it was not a veneration for his name. It was rather a name to laugh at his dull faculty. But later on, based on chanting and reciting the sutra and commentaries, he became very sharp and really eloquent in his life. Around the time he was over 50 years of age, when he was giving teachings with Master Deepen at city of Nanking, he passed away, and the way he passed away was quite miraculous as well. He knew the time that he was going to die, and he was quite at ease to face his death. So the way that the previous masters would persevere, would then be very diligent, is rather quite different than how we are nowadays. Anyhow, spread the Dharma by setting example, or winning bread by setting good example. However it is, I think this kind of a story is quite important to remember. The previous one talks about the Vinaya as well, the discipline as well as wisdom or spreading the Dharma. Then it says that in which they appear in countless transformation bodies in delivering to deliver living beings and to save future generation from defilements.
世界当中呢，就是它变现这样的这个化
So
身。
they would appear in different
然后呢，
kind
就是把
of
其未来呢，
formations
就是约住
and different kind of bodies
那么
to
这个是
appear
对
in
未来
countless
的这种
transformation. This
那么
part
因
talks
为这些
about
圣者的话呢，
to
实际上
teach
是让
in
这
the
个
10 directions,
就
to
是
be
众
completely
生在未来的这个
pervasive
轮
in the
回
10
当中干出
directions.
这个痛苦的话呢，这些都是从轮回里
The
面
previous
救
one
过
talks
的。
about
然后呢，
pervasive
就
in
是让他
this
们
land
套
and
入
this time.
称内
And
称
this
内
part
的话呢
talks
轮
about
回
pervasive in the
轮
10
回的
directions.
这种烦
And
恼
then
的
it says
这
to
些都是
save
称
the
内
future
啊，
generation
这个
from
呢
defilement.
就
It
是
talks
让他们
about
就是离开
pervasive in
这
all
个
the
这
future
个所有的
times.
这个轮回的这种痛苦，就是这是未来的这种这个
So that's the
利
future
益众生
aspect
的这个
of
方法。
benefiting
然
sentient
后
beings.
这样的就是意思就是说呢，上面有这么多的这些特点的什么呢？
So
就是就下面
out
这
of
些
all
阿罗
this
汉
kind of characteristics,
阿罗汉有哪些呢？就是今天只讲两个阿
who
罗汉，
are
一个
these
是
arhats
这
then?
个大智这个舍
I'm
利
going
子
to tell
啊
you
一
the
个
two
呢
stories
就是叫
of
这个摩诃目
the
犍连
great
就是其他的
arhats
我们
who
下一堂会讲。
who are
那么
over
大
here,
智
who
舍
are
利
present here.
大
One
智
is
舍利弗是怎么
Shariputra,
样呢？大智舍利弗呢，
and
实际
second
上
one
是
is
说我们这
Mahamodikalayana.
个智慧
Let's
第
talk
一
about
释迦
Shariputra.
牟尼佛的
As we
经
know
就
that
是经
Shariputra
常
is
在画
known
像
as
里
the
面呢，就是
foremost
在
of
这个
the
右边呢，
wisdom.
就是在
He
右
is
边。
all,
在阿含
he
经里
is
面呢，就
always
是
on the
说
right side
智
of
慧
the
无穷
Buddha.
啊，就是绝
And
妙主义。
in the
所谓
Agama
四力，
Sutra, it is
佛
says
呢
in
地
the
球是，意思
Ikoti
就是说这
Agama
个舍利弗
Sutra,
地球的话呢，实际
it
上呢，就是它是智慧
described
观察一切
Shariputra
法义。
as that the one with
那么
immeasurable
为什
wisdom
么叫
and
舍利弗，或
that
者是
cuts
舍利
through
子
all
啊？就
uncertainties
是他的
is
这个母亲
Bhikshu
呢，就是叫这个
Shariputra.
舍利。
Why
以前
is
印度的话呢，好
he
多都是
named
以
as
母亲为
Shariputra?
名。
In fact,
以母亲
his
为名。
mother
然后
is
母亲呢，就是
in
叫
fact,
那个
this
舍
name
利
comes
子。
from
为
his
什么母
mother.
亲叫舍利呢？就是说是这个舍利
What
子一个
does
庙
it mean,
叫那个
Shariputra?
鸠鲁
In
啊
fact,
就
Shariputra,
好像那
Shari,
个也是一种这
Shari
个非常
means
它眼睛
a
非常好，黑
pelican
黑白这个
it's
分
a
明的，就
bird
是这么一个
because
一个飞
his
禽。
mother
那么
has these
它的这个母
eyes
亲的眼
that
睛呢，就
looks
是特
almost
别，
like a
其实
bird's
印度人的
eye.
很多眼睛还是比较好看的那个。
They have
所以
this
这
beautiful,
个
she had this beautiful eyes
因为他的眼睛
that
那就是就
is
像森林
quite
鸟的那个眼
bright
睛一样，
and
所以他的母亲呢，
the
就当时人们呢
the
就是经常
pupil
叫那
and
个
the
四力，
whites
就
of
是
the
因为
eyes
他
are
眼睛跟
quite
森林鸟有点
distinctive.
像的。
And
所以这个舍
because
利子的
of
话
such
呢，就
kind
是
of
他的
characteristics,
儿子，
she
正因为
is
这样，
then
就是叫这个舍利子，就是这个啊，就是舍利
named
子是这样这样的
as
这个称呼的，
having
就
the
是
name
他
of
是
the
这个
bird
辩
or
才无碍的，
pelican.
就非常
And then
非常有这个智慧
her
啊，
son
在藏汉
would
经里面讲
her
的这样
son's。name is
然后这个母
Shariputra,
犍
which
连，就
means
是摩诃目犍连
the
是什么
son
呢？
of
就是摩诃目犍连呢，就是也是这个身
the
边
son
啊，
of
就是身边第
Shari.
一啊，就是在实现身边的话，那就是各种各样的身边都能
The
可以
next
实
great
现
arhat
很多
is
的一般呢，在画
Mahamodikalayana,
像当中经常
who
是
is
站在
known
这个
as the
左
foremost
边的。
in
那么在阿含经里面呢，
numinous
就是说
penetration.
是这个僧
According
足俱进
to
啊，就
the
是废倒这
Ikutara
个奢
Agama,
望。
it is
那么
said
所谓
that the
母犍
one
连
who is
就
excellent
是
in the
啊
ability to
这样
perform
讲。所以
miracles like
他呢
flying
就是
easily to
就不
anywhere in
管
the
是
10
这个
directions is
在实践
Bhikshu
当中，就是
Madhgalayana.
显示各种各样的这个身边呢，就是显示各种各样的身边，就是这就是母犍连，就是大比丘。那么母犍连是什么去的呢？就是母犍连
What's the story
的
of
整个这个家
Madhgalayana
族的
then?
话呢，就是说
In
是
fact,
先人啊，就是
Madhgalayana
他们在这个山上
came
呢，一般
from
就
the
是术士为
lineage,
主，
or
术
his
士
family
为主。
is
然后呢，有一个
of
叫
the
这个居里
family
哇
of
这个居里都是一
the
个树的
sages.
名字。那么
And
他的这个父母的话呢，
They
实际
were
上
all
是年老
vegetarians.
的
They
时候
picked
还没有
beans,
这个
and
孩子。
his
没有孩
first
子
name
的话
was
呢，就是最
Kolita,
后呢，
and
就
his
是
last name,
他们在那
his
个
family
树
name
面前
is
就是那个无
Madhgalayana.
界树，就是没有
His
结疤的那个
parents
树面前
could
就是
not
进行
conceive
祈祷。
till an
祈祷以后呢，就是后来
old
就是
age
那
to
个僧
have
贤
a
里面，
child.
然后呢，
Therefore, they
僧
supplicated
字
it to a
就是那么这
tree
个就是
that
母
is
犍连，
the
母犍连。
tree
那
Kolita.
母犍连的
And
话呢，就是我们藏文当中是母犍
Madhgalayana, in
连
fact,
字，
was
就是这个
born
色利
from
字
the
母犍
tree
连字，好
Kolita.
像两个都有
Therefore,
一
his
个字
name
的意思
is
啊。就是以前我们讲
Madhgalayana,
我们
Kolita
记得我
Madhgalayana.
也当时说过，就
In
是为什么
Tibetan Tibetan language,
舍利子呢，它是
Madhgalyayana
母亲去的，然后
means
目
the
犍
son
连是怎么
of
弄的
Madhgalya.
呢？就是那目犍连的话呢，就是在有些书里面说是他的
In
母
some
亲呢也
books,
叫
it
做
says
是
that
这个
his mother is
母犍连
Madhgalya,
就是目犍连。然后
and
藏文当中有
his
个字，
name
藏文里面
is
就好像那
his
个只
name
有舍利
means
子
the，son of
然后
Madhgalya.
其
So
实
I'm
藏文
not
里面
quite
是目
sure
犍连
if
是
the
怎么样的。
name
然后他的母亲呢，就是叫这个目犍连。目犍连也许可能是这样的，那个就无界数，就是因为 无界树的话呢，就是它是
In fact,
一棵
Kalita is
一棵树嘛，就是它这
a
个树的这
tree,
个
and
原因呢，就是可能是不是因为后来就是它降生的，就是这个也许原因的。也许呢，就是它
and
的这
maybe
个
because he was born from that tree, therefore he was then named as Modigalyayana, and it means
那么也
that
许的话呢，就是它
Modigar
的这个应该有些
or
里面说
Modigar
是这个
is
什么，它
it
的母
means
亲
certain
呢就是叫
things.
木杆或者木剑嘛，
It could
木剑子
be a tree's name, or it could be
他们
his
跟
mother's
好像
name.
很多一般都有的
There are
没有
different
这个字，这个上文当
explanations
中有字，但是
of his
我想
name
这个
according to
也是
different
他母亲的
translations
这
and
个原因呢，就
editions.
是取出这个这样的这个名字啊，就这两个呢确实是佛陀的这个智慧第一
These
和身边
two
第一
are the
那么还有呢
foremost
就是
in the
其他的这
wisdom
些
and
甚
foremost
至呢也
in
是
the
当场的那个
numinous
就
powers
是大阿罗汉
out of
大
all
菩
the
萨
disciples
那
of
么这些道理的话
Shakyamuni
呢
Buddha.
我们
And
这个
later
下
on
节
we will
课
talk
再给
about
大
the
家
other
介
disciples
绍
and great arhats, great bodhisattvas in next class.
Sonam de donche zebanya tona ni be jana pashe ke kana shi ra lo zeba zeben zone